Most people get nervous when they see red and blue lights flashing in their rearview mirror. Elaine Carter didn't. It wasn't arrogance, it was just experience. She had been through worse, much worse, but even she didn't expect what was coming that night. It was just past midnight when she turned onto a quiet residential street in Toledo. Her headlights barely lit the cracked pavement, and the only sound was the hum of her engine. She wasn't speeding, she wasn't swerving, she was just tired, heading home after a long day of teaching cadets at the university. Then came the flash, the siren, and the sinking feeling she hadn't felt in years. She pulled over without question, hands at 10 and 2, engine off, window down. The officer walked up slowly, flashlight pointed at her face like she was some kind of threat. "You know why I stopped you?" he asked. Elaine blinked. "No, officer, I don't. You were driving suspiciously, kinda slow, late night, lot of weirdos out." "I'm just heading home," she replied calmly. He looked her over, dark slacks, tucked-in polo, veteran license plate on the back. His eyes narrowed. "Step out of the vehicle," he said suddenly. She paused. "Is there a reason?" That was all it took. His voice rose. "Don't make this difficult. You questioning me?" She didn't answer. She just nodded and stepped out. No argument, no anger. But inside, she felt it. The heat, the disbelief, the slow burn of being seen as a problem when all you're doing is going home. He made her stand in the cold while he ran her license. And as she stood there, alone under a flickering street lamp, Elaine realised this wasn't about a traffic stop. It was about power. And the moment she refused to cower, he decided she needed to be put in her place. But what Officer Bradley Knox didn't know was who she really was, and what she was willing to do when justice was on the line. People say your past doesn't follow you, but in this town it does. Officer Kyle Mendez had pulled people over before, hundreds of them. Most were routine, some were tense, but none stayed with him, until her. He kept replaying it in his mind as he sat at the station the next morning, stirring sugar into stale coffee. The way she looked at him, not scared, not angry, just disappointed. Like she'd seen it all before. Kyle hadn't known who she was, not until Officer Diaz, quiet, observant, walked in with a file and a raised eyebrow. "You remember that woman from last night?" Diaz asked, sliding the file across the desk. Kyle barely glanced at it. "Yeah, swerving, non-compliant, tried to talk her way out of it." Diaz didn't smile. "Her name's Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace." That made him pause. "West Point grad, Bronze Star, led humanitarian missions in Syria, works with Homeland now." Kyle blinked. "You serious?" "She outranks half this town." And just like that, the weight shifted. That file didn't just contain her name, it contained everything Kyle hadn't seen, everything he'd dismissed, everything that could now turn his career upside down. Still, he chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "So what, she still failed to comply?" Diaz didn't laugh. "You forced a sobriety test without cause. Body cam caught it all. And she's filed a formal complaint. Legal, military, internal." Kyle's smirk faded. "Why would she do that?" he muttered. Diaz shrugged. "Maybe because people like you keep proving her right." Suddenly, the air in the station felt thicker. The kind of thick you can't talk your way out of. And somewhere, not far from that building, Adrienne Wallace was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop, watching the video again. She didn't want revenge, she didn't want headlines, but she knew what silence could cost. And this time she wasn't staying silent. It's funny how a single moment, just 5 minutes on a dark roadside, can wake up ghosts people spent years trying to bury. Adrienne hadn't slept much. The sun was just beginning to push through her kitchen blinds, casting gold streaks over the hardwood floor. But she wasn't looking at the sunrise. She was looking at the file, the official report, the footage, the audio logs, all of it sitting on her laptop like a dare. She'd dealt with worse before, on battlefields, in foreign embassies, even in uniform back home. But something about this night, this moment, made her stop, because this wasn't about her. It was about every kid who got pulled over and didn't have a badge to back them up. Every woman who got talked down to and didn't record it. Every veteran who came home hoping the uniform would finally mean respect and found out it didn't. Adrienne took a slow breath, then she clicked submit. A formal complaint. Not against the badge, but against what the badge had become in the wrong hands. Some would say it was just a traffic stop, no harm done, let it go. But people always say that when it isn't their dignity on the line. Across town, Kyle Mendez's morning wasn't going any smoother. His inbox had lit up with notices, internal affairs, civil review, media inquiry. Someone had already leaked the body cam timestamp, and the whispers had started. At the water cooler, in the locker room, guys he thought were friends suddenly kept their heads down. The thing about being on the wrong side of a story, it spreads fast. Kyle kept telling himself it'd blow over. That rank didn't excuse attitude, that he'd done his job. But deep down, where ego couldn't cover anymore, a tiny voice was asking, what if I got it wrong? What if I didn't see her? And back in Adrienne's quiet kitchen, she closed her laptop and whispered to no one, let's see if they're ready to hear me now. It didn't take long for the storm to start. By 9 the next morning, Adrienne's name was trending. But not because she wanted it to be. The story had leaked. Someone on the base, someone in the precinct, maybe even someone in the press. It didn't matter. The footage was out there now. A decorated military officer, a midnight traffic stop, and a body cam clip that didn't sit right with anyone who watched it. There was no screaming, no fight, no resistance. Just a calm woman, clearly in control of herself, being yanked out of her car like she was a threat. It was all there, in HD. And suddenly everyone had an opinion. TV pundits, veterans groups, civilians who'd never served a day in their lives. But the one voice that still hadn't spoken, Kyle Mercer. He sat in his truck outside the station, watching his own face play back on the tiny screen of his phone, watching himself step out of line, watching himself become the very kind of cop his dad used to warn him about. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel angry, he felt exposed. Inside the precinct, things weren't quiet either. Captain Rollins had called a mandatory meeting. No phones, no excuses. And when Kyle walked into that room, the air was thick with something worse than judgment, disappointment. Sit down, the captain said flatly. Kyle obeyed. A folder slid across the table. Thin, cold, labelled Notice of Internal Review. And then the words that changed everything. She's not pressing charges for money. She's pressing for accountability. Think about that, officer. Kyle didn't say a word. Because what could he say? That he didn't mean to? That it was just a bad night? That he didn't know who she was? As if any of that mattered. Outside, a storm cloud broke open. Rain hit the windshield like it meant something. And across town, Adrienne stood under that same sky, shoulders back, hands steady, walking into her first legal briefing not as a victim, but as a woman on a mission. This wasn't about revenge. It was about waking up a system that had been sleeping too long. And now, no one could hit snooze. The courtroom was colder than Adrienne expected. Not because of the temperature, but because of the stares. Some were curious, some sceptical, a few downright hostile. But she didn't flinch. She walked in wearing full dress uniform, polished shoes, medals gleaming, her posture perfect. Not to show off, but because she wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with. She wasn't here for sympathy. She was here for truth. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, Kyle Mercer sat stiffly beside his attorney, jaw tight, suit freshly pressed. But he looked like a man trying to stay calm in a burning building. And the moment the first video clip played, the dash cam, the flashing lights, the forced exit, he lowered his eyes. Adrienne didn't look away. The footage was brutal in its honesty. No cuts, no edits, just facts. A calm woman, compliant. And a man in uniform speaking louder than he needed to, grabbing faster than he should have. The room didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The silence was loud enough. When the defense attorney stood, he tried to shift the narrative. She questioned his authority, she delayed the process. But then Adrienne's attorney stepped forward, voice steady. Questioning isn't a crime, and fear of a woman's calm doesn't justify force. The judge didn't say a word. He just nodded slightly and asked for the next clip. This time it was Mercer's own body cam. And as the jury watched his smirk, his dismissive tone, the way he tugged at Adrienne's arm without warning, the mood in the room shifted, from confusion to realization, from doubt to discomfort. When court recessed for the day, Adrienne stepped outside into the afternoon light. Reporters were waiting, cameras, microphones, but she walked past them all. No statements, no sound bites, just a quiet breath and a simple truth she whispered to herself. Let the facts speak louder than I ever could. She wasn't finished. Tomorrow she'd take the stand, and this time everyone would listen. You could hear a pin drop when Adrienne took the stand. Not because people were waiting for drama, but because something about her presence made the room still. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry, she didn't rant. She just told the truth. What happened that night. How she stayed calm. How she kept her hands visible, her tone level, her movements slow. Not out of guilt, but out of fear that one wrong breath could be misread. The jury leaned in. You weren't angry, the attorney asked. Adrienne shook her head. I was afraid and tired, and I just wanted to get home. Then came the moment that hit everyone. Lieutenant Wallace, the defense attorney said, pacing slowly, Isn't it true you never once told Officer Mercer who you were? Adrienne looked straight at him. Because I shouldn't have to. That line landed like a punch to the gut. No bravado, just the truth of it. She explained what her uniform meant. What it cost her to earn those stripes. What it meant to lead soldiers into places Mercer had probably only seen in movies. And then she looked at the jury and said, respect shouldn't depend on what someone's wearing, or whether they're famous, or how loud they are. It should depend on how they act, and how you treat them in return. For a second, even Mercer looked down, his smirk gone, his crossed arms loosened, and then Adrienne added quietly, I didn't want this case to be about me. But if staying silent means this happens to someone else, someone with less support, less rank, less power, then I have no right to stay quiet. It wasn't a speech. It was a stand, and it reminded everyone in that courtroom why she wore that uniform. Not just for medals, but for moments like this when integrity is the only thing louder than injustice. As court adjourned for the day, people didn't rush out. They sat for a moment longer as if they needed time to breathe, because what they'd just heard wasn't just testimony. It was a wake-up call. The courtroom was full the next morning. Not with reporters or activists, but with everyday people. A grocery store manager who'd taken the day off. A high school civics teacher with her entire class. A retired bus driver. A single mum with her 2 young sons sitting quietly in the back row. They weren't there for drama. They were there for the truth. And what they got was more revealing than anyone expected. Sergeant Mercer took the stand. He sat stiffly, hands clasped, jaw tight. Like someone who knew the tide had turned but still thought he could swim against it. His lawyer opened gently. Officer Mercer, walk us through the stop. And Mercer did. Except his version, it sounded empty. No mention of fear, no concern for public safety, just a checklist. She was driving late. I observed a slight swerve. I initiated a stop. But when the prosecutor stood up, things shifted. You said she swerved. Did you run a sobriety test? No, Mercer replied. Did she smell like alcohol? No. Was she rude, combative? She was questioning. The word hung there. Questioning. The prosecutor leaned in. Officer Mercer, is it illegal to question an officer? No. So why did you escalate the stop? Mercer hesitated. I didn't like her tone. A few jurors exchanged glances. And if she had been a man, the prosecutor pressed, would her tone have bothered you? Silence. If she'd been in uniform, if she was someone you recognised, more silence. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. Then came the moment that sealed it. The prosecutor pulled up the body cam footage. Same angle everyone had already seen, but paused at one frame. Is this the moment where she swerved? Mercer squinted. I thought, but it's not, is it? No. And just like that, the weight of what he'd done came crashing down. Not because he shouted or struck anyone, but because of what he assumed, what he ignored, what he refused to see. The courtroom felt heavy again. Not loud, just disappointed. Because Mercer hadn't just pulled over a decorated officer. He'd pulled over his own humanity and left it on the side of the road. The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. Adrienne sat still, her uniform sharp, her posture proud. But inside, her stomach twisted. Today wasn't about her rank or ribbons. It was about standing toe-to-toe with a system that had let someone like Mercer operate unchecked for years. She glanced across the room. Mercer looked smaller than he had outside her car that night. No badge, no sunglasses, just a man in a cheap suit, jaw tight, eyes darting toward the jury every few seconds. He wasn't smirking now. He was sweating. When the judge asked for final arguments, Adrienne's lawyer rose. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The video footage had already spoken volumes. The jury had seen it all, the false accusation, the aggression, the hand yanking open her car door. It was clear. Then Mercer's lawyer stood, stumbling through a half-hearted excuse about protocol confusion and standard procedure. But the damage was done. His client had admitted on the stand that he might have acted differently if he'd known her status. Those words echoed in the room, as if respect was something owed only to rank, not to human dignity. The jury left. Adrienne took a breath, then another. They were gone less than an hour. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Mercer had violated her rights. It was official. The system, for once, had listened. The judge ordered him to pay damages, $35,000, and ruled that the case be reviewed by the Department of Justice for broader civil rights violations. Adrienne didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded and whispered a silent thank you to her uncle, to every person who had been mistreated and stayed silent, and to her own voice for finally speaking up. You'd think justice would bring peace, but sometimes it just uncovers more wounds. The day after the verdict, Mercer's name was everywhere. On news tickers, local papers, and online threads lit up with anger and disbelief. People started digging, and what they found made Adrienne's case feel like just the tip of the iceberg. One article turned into a dozen. Stories from other drivers, some too afraid to speak before, came forward. An elderly man who was pulled over and berated for driving too slow. A teenager handcuffed over a broken taillight. A single mum who said Mercer followed her home after a warning ticket. The department scrambled. Internal Affairs opened a wider investigation. Mercer was put on immediate leave. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't the one asking the questions, he was the one answering them. But none of that felt like victory to Adrienne. She was back on base, standing in her barracks, folding her uniform with practiced care. She didn't watch the news, she didn't check the headlines. What mattered to her wasn't punishment, it was prevention. She had no interest in revenge. She just didn't want this to keep happening. So when a reporter called asking for comment, Adrienne hesitated. But then she said something that would stick with people far beyond the courtroom. I didn't speak out because I wanted a headline. I spoke out because too many people don't get the chance to be heard. If someone in my position doesn't speak up, who will? It wasn't about her anymore. It was about all of them. And the world was finally listening. 2 months later, the Academy auditorium was packed. New cadets sat in crisp uniforms, straight-backed, wide-eyed, notebooks in their laps, phones off. They didn't know who the guest speaker was. Just that they were told, "Pay attention, this one matters." Then she walked in, Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. No fanfare, no entourage, just quiet presence. Some of the cadets whispered, "Was that her? The one from the trial? The woman from the story that had gone viral? The one who stood up to the badge and won?" She stepped up to the podium, let the silence settle, then said, "Let me tell you something they don't print on your badge." The room leaned in. Authority doesn't make you right, it makes you responsible. And if you ever confuse the two, if you ever think your job is to intimidate instead of protect, you're not leading, you're abusing. Her voice never rose, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. She didn't talk about Mercer, she didn't name the department, she didn't need to, the cadets knew. She told them about her uncle, a man stopped once just because of the way he looked. About her own doubts walking into court. About the burden of staying calm when everything inside her was shaking. And then she ended with this. "You're not just enforcers, you're guardians of trust. Remember that, every day, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching." The room was silent when she walked off stage, but one by one the cadets stood. Not for show, not because they were told, because they understood. What Adrienne Wallace had taught them wasn't just about justice, it was about honour. And that kind of lesson, it doesn't fade. It leads, this story really stuck with me. It reminded me that dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It walks away without a word, even when it deserves the whole world's respect. I think we all need that little reminder. Kindness costs nothing, but its impact can be everything. If this story meant something to you too, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Thanks again for being here, out of all the videos you could have chosen. Take care and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to this story. Out of all the videos out there, the fact that you're still here means a lot. If it moved you in any way, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story. Goodbye for now.